A legislator was speeding along a deserted country road to make it to a vote that would determine the fate of millions of people. Suddenly, the steering wheel jerked violently, the car lost its brakes, skidded for a long distance and slammed into a large tree. He narrowly escaped death and desperately begged for help from people around him, but no one paid any attention. Then a young man stepped forward and helped him fix the damaged car. With the boy's help, he arrived at the vote just in time, unaware that only 30 minutes later he would once again face a life-or-death situation. When the boy appeared once more and handed him a mysterious chip, everything was about to change completely. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Michael Harrison's fingers fumbled with his navy tie for the third time. The knot came out crooked again. The 57-year-old federal legislative official cursed under his breath and started over, watching his reflection with the critical eye of a man who knew this morning allowed no room for error. 6:15. The red digits on his dresser clock pulsed like a warning. Outside his bedroom window, rural Pennsylvania lay wrapped in pre-dawn darkness. Out here, 40 miles west of Pittsburgh, streetlights were a luxury nobody bothered with. Just the occasional glow of a neighbor's porch half a mile down the road. Michael had chosen this place deliberately 15 years ago, after Washington had nearly consumed him, because it reminded him that the government was supposed to serve real people, not special interests. He finally got the tie right and studied himself. 57 years old, though the mirror suggested closer to 65. Gray had overtaken what used to be dark brown hair. Deep lines bracketed his mouth and eyes, the cost of too many late nights reading legislation and too many hard decisions that kept him awake afterward. But his eyes still held purpose. His worn leather briefcase sat on the bed, the same one he'd carried for 15 years. Inside were his notes for today's vote, though at this point he could recite every statistic from memory. The debate was over. The arguments had been made. Now came the simple, solemn act of showing up and voting his conscience. House Resolution 4729, the Anti-Discrimination and Worker Protection Act. 3 years of his life distilled into 48 pages of legislative language. The bill would end loopholes that allowed federal contractors to pay substandard wages. It would provide real protections for workers, the kind his father should have had when the steel mill laid him off without severance. The vote count haunted him. 23 representatives firmly committed to yes, 21 firmly committed to no, 6 undecided, not because they didn't know right from wrong, but because they were calculating political advantage, weighing donor pressure against constituent needs. If Michael voted yes, those 6 would likely follow. The bill would pass, imperfect, compromised, but real change nonetheless. If he didn't make it to that vote, the bill would die in committee. Simple as that, and it wouldn't come back, not with this Congress, maybe not for a decade. He grabbed his briefcase and headed downstairs. The coffee maker had done its job, but the cup he poured sat untouched on the counter. His stomach was too tight for coffee this morning. Michael looked out the kitchen window at his driveway and frowned. His car wasn't there. Confusion flickered across his face, then fragments of yesterday surfaced. Richard Cole, his senior legislative aide for 8 years, had mentioned something about the car, taking it in for service, something about brakes. His phone buzzed. A text from Richard appeared. "Morning, sir. The car's ready. Took it to Jerry's shop yesterday. He said brake pads were getting thin and replaced them. I brought it back last night. Keys in ignition like always." Michael stared at the text. He didn't remember asking Richard to handle that. But then again, Richard was thorough to a fault, always 3 steps ahead, anticipating problems before they materialized. That's what made him valuable, even if it sometimes felt like overstepping. He pocketed his phone and stepped outside. Late October air bit at his face, sharp enough to sting. The season balanced on winter's edge. The car sat in the driveway, a dark gray sedan with 7 years and 130,000 miles on it. Nothing fancy. Michael had never believed in wasting taxpayer dollars or donor money on luxury when a reliable car did the job. He climbed in, set his briefcase on the passenger seat, and turned the key. The engine started smoothly, the familiar rumble reassuring. Michael pulled onto the empty rural road and allowed himself to breathe slightly easier. 3 hours to the capital, maybe 2 hours 45 minutes if traffic cooperated. He timed this route a dozen times, built in margins for error. 6:22, 1 hour 38 minutes until the vote. Plenty of time. As farms and forests rolled past, Michael's thoughts drifted to Anna. 5 years have gone by this November. Cancer that spread from her pancreas before any of them knew something was wrong. She'd been a social worker for the state, someone who spent 30 years fighting for kids in the foster system, never making much money, never complaining, always showing up. She would have understood why this vote mattered so much. And Emily, his baby sister, gone 12 years now. 25 years old, just starting her career in child protective services. She and her husband David, both killed by a drowsy truck driver who ran a red light. They'd left behind a 4-month-old son. Michael had tried to get custody, spent 2 years fighting the system, hiring lawyers, filing motions, but Pennsylvania's child welfare bureaucracy was designed to protect children from bad outcomes, which sometimes meant keeping them from good ones too. By the time all the background checks and home studies were complete, the baby had already been placed with a foster family. The records were sealed. The trail went cold. For 2 more years Michael searched. Private investigators. Freedom of information requests. Calls to every county agency. Nothing. The boy had simply vanished into the system, one of thousands of children lost in bureaucratic cracks. Eventually Michael had to accept that he'd failed his sister's memory, failed her son. This bill was for that boy, wherever he was now. For every kid who aged out of foster care with nothing. For every worker the system had failed, including his own father, who died 6 years after the mill closed, his pension dissolved in bankruptcy court. Michael's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The suburbs fell away. The road stretched ahead through rolling hills, empty and quiet. 6:48. Right on schedule. At exactly 7 o'clock, everything changed. The steering wheel jerked violently to the left. Michael's reflexes, honed by 40 years behind the wheel, kicked in immediately. He corrected, gripping harder, forcing the car back into its lane. But something was fundamentally wrong. The steering felt loose, disconnected, like trying to control a shopping cart with a broken wheel. He eased off the accelerator. The car was doing 62 miles per hour on Old Federal Route 22, a narrow 2-lane road through farmland. Safe enough under normal circumstances. Deadly if you lost control. Michael pressed the brake pedal. It went straight to the floor. No resistance, no friction, nothing. His heartbeat kicked up, but his mind stayed cold and analytical, the same discipline that had served him through 30 years of law and 15 years in Congress. Assess the situation. Calculate options. Act. 62 miles per hour. No brakes, curve coming up in approximately 200 yards. If he didn't slow down, he'd lose control on that curve. Michael's hand moved to the gear shift. He dropped from drive into 3rd gear. The engine roared in protest, the whole car shuddering as mechanical forces fought momentum. The speedometer needle began to drop. 60, 57, 54. Not fast enough. The curve was rushing toward him. He shifted again, forcing the transmission into 2nd. The grinding sound was terrible, metal screaming against metal, but the car slowed more. 50, 48, 45. Still too fast. Michael had maybe 3 seconds left to decide. He could try to make the curve at this speed and probably roll the vehicle, or he could aim for something solid and pray the airbags worked. A massive oak tree stood on the right shoulder 60 feet ahead. Michael aimed for it, turning the wheel at the last second so the impact would come at an angle rather than head-on. He'd prosecuted enough accident cases as a young lawyer to know that angle mattered. The crash was violence compressed into 2 seconds. The airbag exploded in his face with chemical force, driving the air from his lungs. Metal shrieked, glass shattered into 1,000 pieces. The car spun 90 degrees before slamming to a stop. Then silence. Michael sat stunned, his chest aching where the seatbelt had locked tight. His face burned where the airbag had struck. His hand still gripped the steering wheel. But he was breathing. He was alive. He pushed the deflated airbag away and assessed the damage. The windshield was spider-webbed but intact. The driver's door was crumpled inward about 6 inches. Steam hissed from under the buckled hood. He tried the ignition. Dead. He reached for his phone. No signal. This stretch of Route 22 was notorious for dead zones. The hills blocked cell towers. That isolation had seemed like an advantage when planning his route. No traffic meant he could make good time. Now it felt like a trap. Michael checked his watch. 7:06 in the morning. 54 minutes until the vote closed. The Capitol was still over an hour away, assuming he had a working vehicle. He forced the damaged door open and climbed out on shaking legs. The morning air was cold and sharp, clearing some of the shock from his system. He walked around and popped the hood. Michael wasn't a mechanic, but he'd grown up in a house where you learn to fix things yourself. His father had taught him basic car maintenance before the mill closed and took everything else with it. What he saw under the hood made his blood run cold. The brake lines had been cut. Not worn through. Not corroded by age or salt. Cut clean, precise, deliberately. Someone had sabotaged his car. Someone had known his route, his timing, exactly where to strike. Michael's mind immediately went to the obvious suspects. The corporate lobbying groups that had spent millions fighting his bill. The contractors who stood to lose billions in profit margins. The special interest donors who'd made it clear, politely, carefully, always maintaining deniability, that his vote would have consequences. But this went beyond political pressure and campaign contributions. This was attempted murder disguised as mechanical failure. He looked up and down the empty road. Nothing. No cars. No farmhouses within sight. No help. The nearest farm was probably 2 miles back. The nearest gas station is at least 12 miles ahead. Michael started walking because there was no other choice. Maybe someone would drive by. Maybe he'd find a house with a landline. But with each step, the reality settled into his bones. Whoever planned this had chosen well. Remote location. No witnesses. No cell service. By the time anyone found him, the vote would be over. 3 years of work, millions of workers counting on protections they didn't even know were hung by a thread. All of it lost. Michael kept walking because that's what you did. You kept moving forward even when the math said you'd already lost. 7:13. 47 minutes left. He'd covered maybe a quarter mile when he saw someone ahead. A figure sitting by the roadside near some trees. As Michael got closer, details emerged from the morning shadows. A teenage boy, maybe 16 or 17, sitting on an overturned plastic crate. Next to him, a battered bicycle and a toolbox that looked like it had survived a war. The boy looked up as Michael approached. Dark hair that needed cutting. Eyes that seemed older than his face. Hands stained with grease to the elbows. Worn jeans and a faded jacket. "You okay, mister?" The boy stood, voice calm and steady. "Heard the crash. It sounded pretty bad." Michael's voice came out rougher than intended. "My car's wrecked. I need help. It's urgent." The boy was already grabbing his toolbox. "Let me take a look." They walked back together in tense silence. Michael watched as the boy circled the vehicle with an assessing eye, then dropped to his knees and crawled underneath to examine the undercarriage. When he emerged, his jacket was covered in more grease and his expression had gone dark. He popped the hood without asking and studied the engine. Traced lines with his fingers. Examined the brake system carefully. "This wasn't an accident," the boy said quietly, looking directly at Michael. "Somebody cut your brake lines. Did it smart too, made it so the system would fail gradually, not all at once. First hard brake would drain the fluid reservoir. After that maybe 2 or 3 pumps before you had nothing." Michael's jaw tightened. "I know. Can you fix it?" The boy stared at the engine for a long moment, running calculations. Then he said something Michael didn't expect. "Maybe, if you're not in a hurry. I have to be at the Capitol building by 8 o'clock. It's literally life and death, not mine but a lot of other people's." The boy looked at him with those old eyes and a young face. Something shifted in his expression, recognition of genuine urgency. "Then you better stop talking and let me work." Michael stepped back and watched as the teenager moved with purposeful efficiency. His hands knew exactly where to reach, which components to remove, which connections to check. This wasn't a kid tinkering with cars for fun. This was someone who'd spent years solving mechanical problems with insufficient tools and no margin for error. 7:24. 36 minutes until the vote closed. "What's your name?" Michael asked, partly to gather information, partly to focus on something besides the seconds ticking away. "Ethan." The boy didn't look up. He was bent over the engine now, examining something Michael couldn't see. "Hand me that adjustable wrench. The 8-inch one." Michael found the tool and passed it over. "Do you do this often? Work on cars out here?" "Most mornings." Ethan's voice was matter-of-fact. "People break down on this stretch pretty regularly. Cell phones don't work. AAA takes 2-3 hours to show up. So I help when I can." "Do your parents know you're out here?" Ethan's hands paused for just a heartbeat. A brief hesitation that spoke volumes. "Don't have parents. Foster system until I turned 16 last year. Been on my own since." Michael felt something tighten in his chest. 16 years old and living alone. "Where do you stay?" "There's a garage in town. A guy named Frank owns it. He lets me sleep in the back room, work on vehicles for him. I'm pretty good with the complicated stuff. The jobs other mechanics don't want to touch." Ethan pulled a severed brake line free and examined it. "Frank feeds me, lets me use his tools. It's a fair arrangement. That's not much of a life for someone your age. It's better than some group home where they don't care if you're there or not." Ethan's voice was flat, stating facts without self-pity. "And I'm good at fixing things. Seems like a waste not to use that." 7:31. 29 minutes. Michael watched as Ethan began building something that shouldn't work. The boy was bypassing the entire brake system, using copper tubing from his toolbox to create a direct hydraulic line that circumvented the damaged sections. His movements were precise, economical. The work of someone who'd learned through repetition and necessity. "This is crazy," Michael muttered. "Yeah, well, crazy's what we've got." Ethan was sweating now despite the cool morning air. "Look, I'm not gonna lie to you. What I'm building here isn't safe by any normal standard. It's a jury rig, but it should hold for 40, maybe 50 miles if you drive carefully and don't brake hard." "How carefully?" "Keep it under 50 miles per hour. When you need to stop, pump the brakes 3 or 4 times first to build pressure. Don't make any sudden moves." Ethan looked up, meeting Michael's eyes. "And understand that this could fail at any moment. I'm essentially building a brake system out of spare parts and hope." 7:36. 24 minutes. "I don't have a choice," Michael said. "If I don't make that vote, a lot of vulnerable people are going to keep getting exploited by the system." Something flickered across Ethan's face, understanding maybe, or recognition. "Then I better make sure this holds." He worked faster, his bleeding fingers moving with practiced precision. Michael found himself thinking about his father, who'd worked in that steel mill for 28 years. His father had been good with his hands too, and could fix anything mechanical. But when the mill closed and the pension disappeared, those skills hadn't been enough to save him from dying broke and bitter. 7:43. 17 minutes. "Okay, get in and pump the brake pedal," Ethan said, 3 times hard as you can. Michael slid into the driver's seat and did as instructed. This time he felt resistance, faint but real. Again, "Keep pumping." Michael pumped, watching his watch like it was counting down to execution. 7:44. 16 minutes. "Now try starting it." Michael turned the key. Nothing. The engine didn't even turn over. "Damn it." Ethan was back under the hood. The impact knocked the starter connection loose. "Give me 2 minutes." 2 minutes felt like 2 hours. Michael sat in the driver's seat, doing the math over and over. Even if Ethan got the car running right now, Michael would have to drive 45 minutes of road in 14 minutes. Impossible. 7:47. 7:48. "Try it now." Michael turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, made a sound like it was drowning. He tried again. The engine caught. The sound was rough, unhealthy, but it was running. Ethan slammed the hood and stepped back, wiping bloody hands on his jeans. "That'll hold, maybe. Don't go over 50. Don't brake hard. You've got maybe 50 miles before the whole thing comes apart." 7:49. Ethan minutes left. The capital was 45 minutes away under perfect conditions. Michael reached for his wallet. "How much do I owe you?" Ethan shook his head, already stepping back. "Nothing." Son, you just saved my life and probably a lot of other people's lives. Let me pay you. I didn't do it for money. Ethan's voice was quiet but firm. You needed help. I helped. That's how it's supposed to work. Michael stared at this kid who had nothing and asked for nothing in return. In that moment he saw his father, who'd believed in an honest day's work for honest pay until the system proved that wasn't enough. He saw Anna, who'd spent her career helping kids in foster care for a salary that barely covered rent. He saw Emily, who died trying to make the world better for one child at a time. What's your last name? Michael asked. Miller. Ethan Miller. Michael pulled out a business card, scribbled his personal cell number on the back with shaking hands. Listen to me. After today, whatever happens, you call me if you need anything. I mean that. Anything. Ethan took the card, glanced at it. His eyes widened slightly. You're a congressman, representative, and right now a very late one. Michael put the car in gear. The transmission protested but held. Thank you, Ethan. I won't forget this. Just make it there alive, Ethan said. Whatever you're voting on, make it count. Michael pulled away, the car shuddering but moving. In his rearview mirror, Ethan stood alone on that empty road, covered in grease and blood, just a kid doing what was right because nobody else would. 7:50. 10 minutes to cover 45 minutes of road. Michael pressed the accelerator and started praying. Michael pushed the damaged car to its breaking point. Ethan had said 50 miles per hour maximum. Michael was doing 70. The engine knocked and rattled like it was tearing itself apart. The steering pulled hard to the left, forcing him to grip the wheel with both hands. Strange vibrations shook the frame. Every mechanical instinct screamed at him to slow down. But he couldn't. 7:53. 7 minutes. The rural landscape blurred past. Michael's world had narrowed to three things: the road ahead, the clock on his dashboard, and the desperate hope that Ethan's repairs would hold just a little longer. The pressure in his chest was getting worse, a tightness spreading from his sternum up into his jaw. Michael told himself it was just stress, just adrenaline. He'd deal with it after the vote. 7:55. 5 minutes. Suburbs began appearing. Houses, shopping centers. A traffic light ahead turned red. Michael didn't slow down. He blew through the intersection, ignoring the angry horn blast from a minivan. 7:57. 3 minutes. The Capitol dome appeared on the horizon, white marble gleaming in the morning sun. So close. Michael pressed harder on the accelerator. The engine made a sound like metal screaming. Smoke began pouring from under the hood. Hold together, Michael whispered. Just a little further. 7:58. 2 minutes. He screeched into the Capitol parking garage, tires squealing on polished concrete. Smoke billowed from the engine. Michael abandoned the car in a no-parking zone. It didn't matter, nothing mattered except getting inside. He ran. His lungs burned. His legs felt like lead. At 57, sprinting through a parking garage shouldn't have been possible. But fear and desperation made it possible. 7:59. 1 minute. He burst through the security checkpoint. The guards recognized him, waved him through. He could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears, feel his pulse pounding in his temples. The voting chamber was ahead. Down this corridor, through those oak doors that were starting to swing closed. Wait. Michael's voice came out as a hoarse croak. The clerk at the door looked up, saw Michael, and held the door. Michael stumbled into the chamber just as the clock struck 8. Every eye turned toward him. He was gasping for breath, barely able to stand. His suit was rumpled and stained. He looked like a man who'd just survived a car crash, which was exactly what he was. The speaker's voice cut through the sudden silence. Representative Harrison, you're just in time. Please cast your vote. Michael walked to his seat on shaking legs, picked up the electronic voting tablet with trembling hands. The bill was displayed in simple text, H.R. 4729. The Anti-Discrimination and Worker Protection Act. Michael pressed yes. The board lit up green. His vote was recorded. Around the room, the 6 undecided representatives saw which way the wind was blowing. One by one they added their votes. Yes, yes, no, yes, yes, yes. When the final tally appeared, silence held the chamber. The bill had passed by 2 votes. Applause erupted from half the room, angry muttering from the other half. Michael barely heard any of it. He sank into his chair, staring at the board showing his name next to that green yes. Against impossible odds he'd made it. Then the room started spinning. The pressure in Michael's chest exploded into searing pain. His vision grayed at the edges. He tried to stand, tried to call for help. His body wouldn't cooperate. "Michael?" The representative next to him sounded far away. "Are you okay?" Michael tried to answer. His mouth wouldn't form words. The marble floor rushed up to meet him. The last thing he heard before darkness, someone screaming for a doctor. Beeping woke him. Steady, rhythmic, mechanical. The sound of medical equipment monitoring a life that had nearly ended. Michael opened his eyes to white ceiling tiles and harsh fluorescent lights. Hospital. The antiseptic smell confirmed it, that unique combination of disinfectant and institutional fear. He tried to sit up. A firm hand stopped him. "Easy, representative," a woman's voice, calm and professional. "You've had a serious cardiac event. You need to stay still." Michael turned his head. A middle-aged Asian woman, blue scrubs, stood beside his bed. Her name tag read Dr. Patricia Chen. Cardiology. "The vote," Michael croaked, his throat raw. "Passed 2 hours ago. You're all over the news. Representative survives crash, makes historic vote, then collapses. Very dramatic." Dr. Chen checked the monitors, her expression neutral. "You suffered a myocardial infarction. A heart attack. Severe enough that you're lucky to be having this conversation." Michael closed his eyes. The vote had passed, that was all that mattered. "Your heart sustained significant damage," Dr. Chen continued, her tone matter-of-fact but not unkind. "We've got you on blood thinners, beta blockers, and several other medications. You'll be here at least 5 days, possibly longer. And when you leave, Representative Harrison, you're going to make major changes to how you live." "How bad is it?" Dr. Chen pulled up a chair and sat down, which told Michael more than her words would. Doctors only sat when the news was serious. "Bad enough that if you'd kept running for another minute or two, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Your body has limits, Representative. You exceeded them this morning." She paused. "Whatever was so important that you pushed yourself to this point, was it worth dying for?" Michael thought about Ethan Miller, a kid with nothing, fixing a stranger's car because it was the right thing to do. About millions of workers who'd now have real protections. About Anna and Emily and all the people who'd never gotten a second chance. "Yes," he said quietly. "It was worth it." Dr. Chen shook her head but didn't argue. "Get some rest. Half of Congress wants to visit, but I told them you need at least 24 hours of complete silence first." After she left, Michael lay there listening to the heart monitor's steady beep. Each beep was proof he was alive. Still able to make a difference. But for how much longer? The next few days passed in a blur of medical tests, political phone calls, and visitors. His colleagues came by to congratulate him, carefully not mentioning how close he'd come to dying. The media called him a hero. Editorial boards praised his dedication. Richard Cole visited twice, looking appropriately concerned and supportive, saying all the right things about recovery and not worrying about work. Michael smiled and played his part. But he couldn't shake the growing certainty that something was deeply wrong. The sabotaged car. The precisely timed breakdown. The remote location where help shouldn't have been possible. Someone had tried to stop him. Someone had almost succeeded. On the 4th day, Dr. Chen cleared him for light walking. 20 minutes maximum. Stay in the hospital corridors. Any chest pain or shortness of breath, you stop immediately. Michael agreed. He needed to move, needed to feel like something other than a patient waiting for his next test. He walked slowly through the sterile corridors, still in his hospital gown, wheeling his IV stand alongside him. The hospital was busy, nurses hurrying between rooms. Doctors reviewing charts, families gathered in waiting areas, waiting for news that could change everything. He was passing the cardiac ward when he heard raised voices. A security guard's voice, firm but not unkind. "Son, I already told you, family only, hospital policy. But he doesn't have a family. I'm all he's got right now." A younger voice, insistent but respectful. Please, I just want to see if he's okay. Michael stopped, recognizing that second voice. He moved closer to see what was happening. Ethan Miller stood at the nurse's station, facing down a hospital security guard who was twice his size. The boy still wore the same grease-stained jacket from 4 days ago. His jeans had new tears in them. He looked exhausted, like he'd ridden his bicycle 60 miles, which he probably had. A nurse stood behind the desk, arms crossed, her expression sympathetic but firm. I'm sorry, honey, but Mr. Reed is in intensive cardiac care. ICU rules are strict, immediate family only, no exceptions. But I told you he doesn't have an immediate family. His daughter lives in California, she can't get here until tomorrow. He's alone in there. Ethan's voice was strained, holding on to patience by a thread. I just want to sit with him for 10 minutes. Make sure he knows someone's here. That's all. The security guard, a younger man with a name tag reading J. Martinez, shook his head. Rules are rules, kid. I get that you care, but I can't let you past this point without family authorization. Then get me someone who can authorize it. A supervisor. A doctor. Someone. Ethan's hands were clenched at his sides, frustration building. Mr. Reed brings me sandwiches. He asks how my day was. He's one of maybe 3 people in this entire city who gives a damn whether I'm alive or dead. So I'm not leaving until someone lets me see him. The nurse's expression softened further. Look, we understand. But is there a problem here? Michael's voice cut through the standoff. All 3 of them turned. The security guard's eyes widened slightly, recognizing Michael from the news coverage. The nurse straightened, suddenly professional. Ethan's expression shifted from frustration to surprise. Representative Harrison, the nurse said quickly, you shouldn't be out of bed. I'm fine. Dr. Chen cleared me for walking. Michael moved closer, still wheeling his IV stand. I couldn't help but overhear. This young man is trying to visit Thomas Reed. Yes, sir, but hospital policy. I know Thomas Reed, Michael said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone that came from 15 years in Congress. He's worked security at the federal building for 20 years. Good man. Dedicated public servant. He looked at Ethan. And this young man here saved my life 4 days ago. Fixed my car when it broke down on Route 22. Without him I wouldn't have made it to that vote you've all been reading about. The atmosphere shifted immediately. The security guard's posture relaxed slightly. The nurse's expression changed from bureaucratic firmness to genuine interest. He did? The nurse asked. He did? Michael met the security guard's eyes. Officer Martinez, I understand you're following protocol. But Mr. Reed is a federal employee, and as his representative in Congress, I'm authorizing this visit as official business. This young man is here at my request to check on Mr. Reed's condition and provide me with a report. It was a stretch of authority, and everyone there knew it, but it was also a face-saving way out of the standoff. Officer Martinez hesitated, then nodded slowly. Well, if it's official congressional business, he looked at the nurse, that would fall under different visitor protocols, wouldn't it? The nurse caught on quickly. Yes, technically that would be allowed. She looked at Ethan, her expression kind now. 10 minutes. Room 314. Be quiet, don't disturb any of the equipment, and if a doctor or nurse asks you to leave, you leave immediately. Understood? Ethan nodded, relief flooding his face. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you, Officer Martinez, Michael added. I appreciate your dedication to protocol. We need more people who take rules seriously. The security guard nodded, looking slightly pleased at the recognition. Just doing my job, sir. As Ethan started toward the ICU corridor, Michael called after him quietly. Ethan. The boy turned back. After you're done visiting Mr. Reed, come find me. Room 218. I'd like to talk to you. Ethan studied Michael's face for a moment, then nodded. Okay, and thank you for that. He gestured back at the nurse's station. You did me a favor 4 days ago, Michael said. I'm just returning it. Ethan disappeared down the corridor toward the ICU. Michael stood there for a moment, thinking about a 13-year-old kid who'd ride 60 miles on a bicycle to visit a sick man who'd shown him small kindnesses, thinking about how the system pushed people like Ethan to the margins, and then wondered why society seemed to be falling apart. The nurse approached him, her voice quiet. "That was kind of you, Representative. Bending the rules like that. Sometimes the rules need bending," Michael said, "especially when they keep good people from doing good things." He turned and walked slowly back toward his room, the IV stand's wheels squeaking softly against the polished floor. His chest ached, the familiar cardiac pain mixed with something else, something that felt like grief and hope tangled together. 20 minutes later, there was a soft knock on his door. "Come in," Michael called. Ethan stepped into the room, closing the door quietly behind him. His eyes were red, like he'd been crying, but his face was composed. "How is he?" Michael asked. "Stable. That's what the nurse said. He's sleeping, hooked up to a lot of machines. But stable." Ethan stayed near the door, uncertain. "I just sat with him for a few minutes. Told him about fixing your car. About the vote passing. I think he heard me. His heart rate monitor changed a little when I was talking. I'm sure he appreciated you being there." Ethan nodded, then seemed to notice Michael's hospital setup for the first time. The monitors, the IV bags, the general atmosphere of medical crisis management. "You almost died too, didn't you? When you collapsed after the vote?" "Yes," Michael said simply. "Heart attack. Severe one. Because you pushed too hard to get there. Because it mattered enough to push that hard." Ethan absorbed this, his old young eyes studying Michael carefully. Was it worth it? Almost dying for a vote. Michael thought about how to answer honestly. "Ask me that again in a year. If that bill actually helps people the way it's supposed to, then yes. If it gets watered down or ignored or twisted into something that serves corporations instead of workers, then maybe not. But you don't know until you try." Ethan moved further into the room, finally sitting in the visitor's chair beside the bed. He looked exhausted, running on fumes and determination. "When did you last eat?" Michael asked. "Yesterday, maybe. I don't really remember." Michael reached for the call button. When a nurse appeared, he said, "Could we get a meal tray in here? Whatever's available, for my visitor." The nurse glanced at Ethan, took in his thin frame and exhausted face and nodded. "I'll see what I can find." After she left, Michael and Ethan sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Ethan said quietly, "Why did you help me back there? With the security guard, you didn't have to do that. You helped me when I needed it. Seemed fair to return the favor." "That's not the same thing. You were dying. You needed your car fixed to make a vote that would help millions of people. I just wanted to visit someone in the hospital. And that someone matters to you. Which means it matters." Michael shifted in his bed, trying to find a more comfortable position. "Ethan, I've spent 15 years in Congress writing laws and casting votes. Important work, necessary work. But you know what I've learned? The big systemic changes matter, but so do the small personal kindnesses. Both are necessary. Neither is sufficient alone. You fixed my car because I needed help. You rode 60 miles to visit a sick man because he'd been kind to you. Those actions matter just as much as any vote I've ever cast. Maybe more because they're direct, immediate, human." Ethan was quiet, processing this. Then he said, "Can I ask you something? Anything? That vote you almost died for, who does it help, specifically?" Michael smiled slightly. "This kid is asking the right questions. Low-income workers, primarily. People working for federal contractors who've been getting exploited through loopholes. Janitors making $7 an hour with no benefits. Construction workers hired as independent contractors so companies don't have to provide insurance. People like," he stopped, a thought occurring to him. "People like your father," Ethan finished quietly. "The one who worked in the steel mill." Michael nodded, surprised. "How did you know about that?" "You mentioned it. That morning, when I was fixing your car. You said something about your father losing his job, losing his pension. You said this vote was for people the system had failed." Ethan's voice was soft. "I remember because it's the same thing that happened to Frank's dad. Worked in the mines for 30 years. Company declared bankruptcy, pension dissolved. He died broke. It happens too often, Michael said. Which is why we keep fighting to change it. The nurse returned with a tray, soup, a sandwich, apple juice, and a small salad. She set it on the rolling table and positioned it in front of Ethan. Eat slowly. If you haven't eaten in a while, your stomach might not handle it well if you rush. Thank you, Ethan said, and meant it. As he ate, carefully, savoring each bite like he wasn't sure when the next meal would come, Michael watched him and thought about Emily. About how she'd spent her too short life fighting for kids, exactly like this one. Kids who'd fallen through every crack in the system. Kids who survived anyway, against all odds. Ethan, Michael said, "What happened to your parents?" The boy paused mid-bite, then set the sandwich down carefully. "Why are you asking?" "Because you mentioned being in foster care. Because you're 13 years old, and living alone in the back of a garage. Because I'd like to understand your situation better." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, deciding how much to share. Finally he said, "Car accident when I was a baby. That's what they told me anyway. I don't remember any of it. Both my parents died. I survived. They put me in the system, and I've been there ever since. No other family. If there was, they never came looking for me." Ethan picked up the sandwich again, keeping his hands busy. "The records were incomplete or something. They couldn't figure out who I was or where I came from, so they gave me a name, Miller, and stuck me in foster care." Michael's heart was beating faster, and it had nothing to do with cardiac damage. "What do you mean they couldn't figure out who you were?" "The accident scene was a mess apparently. No identification on the bodies. The car was registered to some company, not individuals. They couldn't match me to any missing persons reports, so they estimated my age, picked a birthday, gave me a name, and processed me through the system." Ethan's voice was flat, reciting facts he'd clearly repeated many times. "I've been Ethan Miller my whole life, but I don't know if that was ever my real name." Michael's hands were starting to tremble. He gripped the bed rail to steady them. "Do you have anything from before? Any personal items, documents, anything?" Ethan hesitated, then slowly pushed up his sleeve. On his wrist was a thin silver chain tarnished with age. A small pendant hung from it, a compass no bigger than a dime. Michael's world stopped. He knew that bracelet. He'd bought it himself 13 years ago at a jewelry shop in Philadelphia. A graduation gift for Emily. "Where did you get that?" His voice came out barely above a whisper. Ethan looked down at the bracelet, confused by the intensity of the question. "This, they said I was wearing it when they found me. After the accident. It's the only thing I have from before." Michael couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. 13 years ago, car accident. Baby who survived. Parents who didn't. A bracelet he'd personally given to Emily. "Ethan," Michael said, his voice shaking, "I need to see that bracelet. Please." The boy unclasped it without hesitation and handed it over. Michael held it up to the fluorescent light with trembling fingers. There on the back of the compass pendant, almost worn smooth but still faintly visible, were two initials scratched into the silver. E.H. Emily Harrison. And below that, in Michael's own handwriting from 13 years ago, June 5, 2012, Emily's graduation date. Michael looked at the boy sitting in the visitor's chair, eating hospital food, wearing grease-stained clothes, really looked at him. The shape of his face, Emily's delicate features mixed with David's stronger bone structure, the hazel eyes with gold flecks, exactly like Emily's. The way he held himself with quiet dignity despite having every reason to be bitter and broken. "How old are you?" Michael asked, though he already knew the answer. 13, maybe 13 and a half. They weren't completely sure when I was born, so they estimated. The math fit perfectly. Emily's son would be 13 now. Michael's hands started shaking so badly he almost dropped the bracelet. The heart monitor beside his bed began beeping faster, alarmed by his elevated heart rate. "Sir, are you okay?" Ethan stood up, concerned. "Should I call a nurse?" No, I'm." Michael couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't form words around the enormity of what he'd just realized. He'd found him. After 12 years of searching, of hiring investigators, of fighting the system, of failing over and over again, he'd found Emily's son. Not through investigation or legal battles or political connections, By breaking down on a rural road at exactly the right time, in exactly the right place, where a boy who'd been lost for 12 years happened to sit every morning fixing cars for strangers who needed help. Ethan, Michael said, his voice breaking, I know who you are. I've been looking for you for 12 years. The boy stared at him, confusion and hope and fear all flickering across his young face. What are you talking about? And Michael, still holding the tarnished silver bracelet with his sister's initials on it, began to tell him the truth. Ethan carefully released Thomas's hand and stood, stepping into the hallway. He closed the door quietly behind him. Representative Harrison. His voice was soft, surprised. I heard you collapsed. I'm glad you're okay. Michael struggled to find words. What are you doing here? Ethan glanced back at the room. Mr. Reed. He stops by Frank's garage sometimes when he's driving back from his shifts. Always brings me a sandwich, asks how I'm doing. When I heard he was in the hospital with kidney problems, I figured I should visit. He doesn't have much family. Of course this kid who had nothing would ride his bicycle 60 miles round trip to visit a sick man who'd shown him small kindnesses. Michael felt that familiar tightness in his chest, the emotional kind, not cardiac. That's a long ride from where I broke down. About 3 hours each way. Not too bad. Ethan said it like it was nothing, like a 6-hour bicycle ride was perfectly reasonable. They stood in the hallway, two people from completely different worlds who'd collided in the most unlikely way. Michael was about to speak when something on Ethan's wrist caught his eye. A bracelet, thin silver chain, tarnished with age, with a small pendant hanging from it. Michael's heart, his damaged, fragile heart, seemed to stop. He knew that bracelet, had bought it himself 13 years ago at a jewelry shop in Philadelphia. A graduation gift for Emily when she'd finished her degree in social work. The pendant was a tiny silver compass, no bigger than a dime. He'd had it engraved, "Find your way home." Where did you get that bracelet? Michael's voice came out barely above a whisper. Ethan looked down at his wrist, confused by the intensity. I've had it my whole life, at least as long as I can remember. They said I was wearing it when they found me after the accident. It's the only thing I have from before. Michael's hands started shaking. What accident? The one that killed my parents. Car crash when I was a baby. Ethan's voice was steady, reciting facts he'd obviously repeated many times. I don't remember any of it. They told me both my parents died at the scene. I was the only survivor still in my car seat. They put me in foster care. This bracelet was the only personal item logged with my case file. Michael couldn't breathe. 13 years ago, car crash. Baby who survived, parents who didn't. What's your birth name? Michael asked, though part of him already knew. That's the thing. Nobody knows. The records from the accident scene were incomplete. No wallets found. The car was registered to a company, not an individual. They couldn't match me to any missing persons reports. Ethan touched the bracelet unconsciously. The system gave me the name Miller because they had to call me something. I've been Ethan Miller my whole life, but I don't know if that was my real name. Michael's legs were giving out. He reached for the wall to steady himself. A passing nurse noticed, started toward him. He waved her away. Can I see that bracelet, please? Ethan unclasped it without hesitation and handed it over. Michael held it up to the fluorescent light with trembling fingers. There, on the back of the compass pendant, almost worn smooth but still faintly visible, were two initials scratched into the silver. E.H. Emily Harrison. And below that, in Michael's own handwriting from 13 years ago, June 5, 2012. Emily's graduation date. Michael looked at the boy standing before him. Really looked at him. The shape of his face, Emily's delicate bone structure mixed with David's stronger jaw. The hazel eyes with gold flecks, exactly like Emily's. The way he stood with quiet dignity despite having every reason to be bitter. How old are you? Michael's voice shook. 13, maybe 13 and a half. They weren't completely sure when I was born, something about missing records, so they estimated and picked a date. The math fit. Emily's son would be 13 now. Almost 14. Michael slowly slid down the wall until he was sitting on the hospital floor, still clutching the bracelet. Hospital staff started hurrying over. He ignored them. I know who you are, Michael said, his voice breaking. I've been searching for you for 12 years. Ethan knelt down slowly beside him, concerned on his young face. I don't understand. Michael looked into those eyes, Emily's eyes. Your mother's name was Emily Harrison. She was my baby sister. Your father's name was David Chen. They were driving home from your pediatrician appointment when a truck driver fell asleep at the wheel and ran a red light. His voice cracked. I tried to find you. I spent 2 years fighting the system, but you'd already been placed and the records were sealed and I couldn't. He couldn't finish. 12 years of searching. 12 years of failure. And here was Emily's son alone, sleeping in a garage, fixing cars for strangers because that's what Emily would have done. Ethan sat down on the floor beside Michael. For a long time neither of them spoke. Around them hospital life continued, nurses making rounds, machines beeping, families navigating their own crises. But in this small space, time had stopped. You're my uncle, Ethan said quietly. Not a question. Yes, the word came out as barely a whisper. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. He held it out carefully. It was a small electronic device, black plastic about the size of a quarter. Serial numbers stamped on one side. I found this under your car when I was fixing it, Ethan said, attached to the undercarriage with a magnetic mount. I didn't know what it was, but it seemed wrong, like someone had put it there on purpose. So I removed it and kept it. Figured if I ever saw you again I should give it back. Michael took the device with numb fingers. He recognized it immediately. A GPS tracking unit, the kind used for vehicle surveillance. Someone had been tracking his every movement, watching where he went, when he went, planning exactly when and where to strike. The sabotage hadn't been random. It had been calculated, precise, carefully orchestrated. Michael looked at the tracking device, then at his nephew, Emily's son, who'd appeared at exactly the right moment, on exactly the right stretch of road to save his life. I need to make a phone call, Michael said. The small conference room had pale blue walls and uncomfortable chairs, the kind hospitals used for delivering difficult news to families. Michael sat across from Ethan, a manila folder of documents spread between them. Records his congressional office had pulled in the past 36 hours. I need to tell you about your mother, Michael said. About Emily. Ethan sat very still, hands folded on the table. In the harsh fluorescent light, Michael could see the resemblance even more clearly. The way his eyebrows drew together when concentrating. The slight tilt of his head when listening carefully. All Emily. Emily was 7 years younger than me. Michael began. I was already in college when she was born. Our father worked at the steel mill, 28 years on the floor. Our mother was a secretary at the county courthouse. Regular people, working class families. He pulled out an old photograph, Emily at maybe 8 years old, grinning at the camera with dirt on her face and a stray cat in her arms. This was your mother, always bringing home animals that needed help. Injured birds, stray cats, the neighbor's dog that got hit by a car. Drove our parents crazy, but they couldn't say no to her. Ethan picked up the photo carefully, studying it. When Emily was 16, everything changed. The mill closed. Foreign steel, they said, cheaper to import than manufacture here. Dad lost his job, his pension, everything. He tried to find work, but at 54 with a bad back, nobody wanted him. He died 6 years later, heart attack, officially. But really he died of being used up and thrown away. Michael's voice was steady but his hands trembled slightly. Mom lasted another year after that, just gave up. That's when Emily decided what she wanted to do with her life. She saw what happened when the system failed people, saw it destroy our father, and she decided she'd spend her life fighting for people the system forgot. He pulled out another photo. Emily in a graduation gown, older now, with that determined look in her eyes. She got her degree in social work from Penn State. Graduated top of her class. I gave her that bracelet you were wearing. Had it engraved "Find Your Way Home," because I knew the work she was going into. Child Protective Services. It could break your heart if you let it. That's where she met your father. Michael slid across a photo of Emily and a young Asian man, both smiling, both looking exhausted and happy. David Chen. He was getting his doctorate in child psychology. They met at a community center where they both volunteered. He was first generation. His parents had immigrated from Taiwan, worked themselves to death, running a restaurant so David could go to college. Ethan's eyes fixed on the photo of his parents. They got married a year after they met. Nothing fancy, ceremony at the courthouse, reception at that same community center where they'd met. They were both making terrible money, but they were doing work that mattered. Michael's voice softened. Emily called me the day she found out she was pregnant. She'd been told it might not be possible. She had endometriosis, which made conception difficult. But there you were. She cried on the phone, kept saying, "I'm going to be a mother, Mike." Me. He pulled out another photo. Emily is visibly pregnant, David's hand resting on her belly. "You were born early, very early, 28 weeks, 2 pounds, 13 ounces, spent your first 2 months in the neonatal intensive care unit, hooked up to machines keeping you alive." Michael's hands were shaking more now. Emily and David basically lived at that hospital, took turns sleeping in a chair beside your incubator. The doctors weren't sure you'd make it. Your lungs weren't fully developed, but you fought. Emily told me you were the toughest person she'd ever met, and you weren't even 3 months old yet. Ethan's eyes were bright, but he didn't look away from the photos. "Finally they brought you home." Emily called me, crying again, but from relief this time. 2 weeks later they were driving back from a routine pediatrician checkup. A semi-truck driver had been on the road for 16 hours straight, nodded off at the wheel, and ran a red light at 50 miles per hour. Hit them broadside on the driver's side. Michael's voice went flat, reciting facts because emotion would undo him. David died instantly. Emily held on until the ambulance arrived. "She kept asking about you." That's what the paramedic told me later. Her last words were asking if her baby was okay. "You were in your car seat in the back. The angle of impact meant you were partially shielded. Broken arm, severe bruising, concussion, but alive. When they pulled you from the wreckage, you were wearing that bracelet around your ankle. Emily had put it there because it was too big for your wrist." Michael met Ethan's eyes. "I was in Washington when I got the call. Emergency session, couldn't leave. Flew back the next morning. By the time I arrived, you'd already been taken into emergency custody by Child Protective Services. Standard procedure when there's no guardian present at the scene. I told them I was your uncle, that I wanted custody. I had a stable job, income and a clean background. But the system moves slowly. They needed home studies, background checks, and interviews. They had concerns I was single, working long hours, and lived 3 hours away. They said you needed stability, a 2-parent household. I fought them. Hired lawyers, filed motions, called in every political connection I had. 6 months of legal battles. Then they told me you'd been placed in a permanent foster situation. They wouldn't tell me where. Privacy laws, they said. For your protection, they sealed all the records." Michael's voice cracked. "I kept searching anyway. Spent another 1.5 years hiring private investigators, filing freedom of information requests, anything I could think of. But you'd vanished. Thousands of kids in Pennsylvania's foster system. No way to find one specific child when the records are sealed by court order. Eventually I had to accept that I'd failed. Failed you. Failed Emily." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke his voice was steady. "You didn't fail, you tried. That's more than most people do. I should have tried harder. You couldn't have found me. The system made sure of that." Ethan set the photo down carefully. "Can I ask you something? Anything? On that road when I fixed your car, you didn't know who I was. You had no idea I was your nephew. But you still gave me your card, told me to call if I needed anything. Why?" Michael considered the question. "Because you helped someone who needed help and didn't ask for anything in return. In my experience, that kind of person is rare. And because something about you reminded me of Emily, the way you just did what needed doing without making a big deal about it. That was her exactly." Ethan nodded slowly. "I believe you, about all of this. About Emily and David, and the accident, and everything." His voice was calm, but something fierce burned underneath. "Now tell me about that tracking device. Tell me who tried to kill you." Michael looked at this 13-year-old who'd survived more loss and hardship than most adults face in a lifetime, who'd spent the night working to fix a stranger's sabotaged car, who'd spent 12 years alone because bureaucracy decided it knew best. And he told him everything. Special Agent Marcus Webb was FBI, Public Corruption Unit. A thin black man in his mid-40s with intelligent eyes and the kind of quiet competence that came from 20 years of investigating people who thought they were too smart to get caught. "We brought in Richard Cole yesterday morning," Webb said, sitting across from Michael and Ethan in his utilitarian office. He waived his right to counsel, started talking almost immediately. Michael's jaw tightened at his former aide's name. "And Dad," Webb scrolled through notes on his tablet. He admitted everything. "Installing the GPS tracker on your vehicle 3 weeks ago. Monitoring your movements, identifying a stretch of Route 22 with no cell coverage and minimal traffic. He chose the location carefully, the brake lines. He took your car to Jerry's auto shop, like his text said. But Jerry didn't work on it. Cole paid him $300 to leave the car in the bay overnight and forget he'd ever seen it. Cole did the work himself. He'd been researching how to disable brake systems for weeks, watched YouTube videos, studied automotive manuals. He wanted it to fail gradually, not catastrophically. Michael felt sick, so I'd coast to a stop in a location where I couldn't call for help and couldn't reach the capital in time." Exactly. The accident, the impact with the tree, that wasn't part of his plan. He insists he didn't intend for you to be injured, just delayed. Webb's tone made clear what he thought of that distinction. The fact that you managed to get the vehicle repaired and still reach the capital was, quote, "a variable I couldn't have anticipated." Ethan spoke up quietly. "That variable was me." Webb looked at the boy. Yes, according to Cole's statement, he'd thoroughly researched that stretch of road. No mechanics within 15 miles, no houses with clear sightlines, no reason anyone would be there with the skills and tools to repair that kind of damage. He didn't account for someone sitting there every morning helping stranded motorists. What was his motive? Michael asked, though part of him already knew. Webb pulled up another screen. Money, essentially, but not a direct bribe. That would be too traceable. Instead, he was offered a position, Chief of Government Relations for the American Economic Freedom Coalition. Starting salary of $450,000 per year. The AEFC. Michael's hands clenched. That's the corporate lobbying group that's been fighting my bill for 3 years. Correct. They represent approximately 80 major contractors who would be affected by House Resolution 4729. According to Congressional Budget Office estimates, compliance with the new wage and anti-discrimination requirements would cost these companies approximately $6.2 billion over the next decade. Webb met Michael's eyes. Cole's job offer was contingent on the bill failing. If it passed, the offer was withdrawn. If it failed, he'd be brought on board at that salary level. The offer came through intermediaries, carefully worded, maintaining deniability. But Cole understood what was being asked, so he was willing to sabotage my car, potentially kill me for a job. The words tasted like poison in Michael's mouth. He maintains he wasn't trying to kill you, just delay you, make you miss one vote. Webb's expression hardened. Though the law doesn't really distinguish between "I tried to crash your car a little bit" and "I tried to crash your car a lot." What's he being charged with? Attempted assault on a federal official, conspiracy to commit election fraud, destruction of federal property, and several related offenses. The U.S. Attorney is pushing for 15 to 20 years. What about the corporations? Michael asked. The ones who made the job offer. Webb's jaw tightened. That's where it gets complicated. The American Economic Freedom Coalition maintains they simply extended a job offer to someone with relevant experience. They never explicitly told Cole to commit a crime. Legally, that makes it difficult to prove conspiracy. That's, I know, it's bullshit. Webb's professional mask slipped slightly, but it's legal bullshit. That said, we're building a case, following the money, examining communications, looking for evidence of direct coordination. If we can prove the AEFC specifically directed Cole's actions rather than just incentivizing a result, we can bring charges. But it's going to take time. Michael nodded slowly. This was how it always worked. The people who did the actual dirty work went to prison while the people who paid them maintained plausible deniability. There's one more thing, Webb said. During questioning, Cole mentioned that he'd been monitoring your personal situation for months. He knew about your search for your nephew, saw it as an emotional vulnerability he could exploit if necessary. He didn't know the nephew's current location, but he knew you'd been looking. Webb looked at Ethan. When I read that in his statement, I started wondering about coincidences. A teenage boy appearing at the exact right location, at the exact right time, with the exact right skills. That seemed unlikely. You investigated me, Ethan said. Not accusatory, just stating a fact. I did my job. Found foster care records for Ethan Miller, approximate age 13, original surname unknown. Parents deceased in vehicle accident when subject was approximately 4 months old. Webb pushed a piece of paper across the desk. I also requested DNA analysis. Representative Harrison's medical records from his hospitalization provided one sample. The hospital still had blood samples from your intake visit 6 months ago when you were treated for a broken finger at the county clinic. The FBI lab processed them yesterday. He looked at Michael. 99.97% probability of close familial relationship. Ethan Miller is your nephew. 3 weeks after the vote, Michael stood in the small apartment he'd rented for Ethan. It was modest but clean, 2 bedrooms, decent neighborhood in Pittsburgh with good schools nearby. Temporary housing while they figured out something more permanent. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, studying the papers Michael had brought. Legal documents, guardianship paperwork, financial statements showing trusts established in his name, college fund details, everything a 13-year-old would need to build a stable life. I don't understand, Ethan said finally. Michael sat down across from him. What don't you understand? All of this. Ethan gestured at the papers. The apartment, the money, the guardianship offer. You're a congressman. You have a career, responsibilities. I'm just a kid who fixes cars on the side of the road. You're my nephew, Emily's son. I've been searching for you for 12 years, but you didn't know it was me when you gave me your card on that road. You would have helped me anyway. Why? Michael took a moment to find the right words. My whole career has been about writing laws that help vulnerable people. Worker protections, anti-discrimination policies, reforms that might make the system slightly more fair. It matters that vote I almost missed will genuinely improve millions of lives. But it's all abstract. Numbers on paper, policy language, theoretical outcomes. He met Ethan's eyes. And then I met you. You fixed my car not because I could pay you but because someone needed help. You visited a sick man in the hospital because he'd been kind to you. You gave me that tracking device because it seemed important. You helped people without calculating what you'd gain. You're 13 years old, and you already understand something most adults never learn, that doing the right thing is its own reward. You shouldn't have to live alone, sleep in a garage, and fix cars just to survive. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. I don't need guardianship. I've been taking care of myself for almost 2 years. I'm doing okay. Michael felt his heart sink. If that's what you want. But Ethan interrupted. I could use guidance, not charity, not someone trying to fix my life. Just someone who understands how things work, who can teach me how to help people in ways that actually make a difference. You want to go to school. I want to learn real engineering, proper mechanics, not just improvised repairs. And then I want to use those skills to help people who are stuck like I was. Kids aging out of foster care with nothing, families who can't afford basic car repairs and lose their jobs because they can't get to work. People the system forgets about. Ethan looked down at the papers. You change things with votes and laws and policies, but someone still has to be there on that road to actually fix the car when it breaks down. Someone has to do the hands-on work, not just write about it. Michael felt something ease in his chest that had been tight for 12 years. I can help with that, but only if you want the help. You don't owe me anything, not for being your uncle, not for searching for you, not for anything. I know. Ethan's voice was steady, but I'm accepting anyway. Not because I owe you, but because I think together we might actually fix some of what's broken. You with your laws and votes, me with my tools and skills. Maybe between us we can make things better. Michael smiled. Your mother would have said exactly the same thing. Tell me more about her, Ethan said quietly. Not just the big stuff. Tell me what she was like. So Michael did. He told Ethan about Emily's terrible singing voice and how she sang anyway. about her habit of adopting stray animals and giving them ridiculous names, about how she cried at sad movies but stayed dry-eyed through funerals because someone had to hold it together, about her fierce loyalty to people others had written off. They talked until the sun set, uncle and nephew filling in 12 years of blank space between them. The converted warehouse in Pittsburgh's industrial district had been empty for 7 years before Michael bought it. 18,000 square feet of space with high ceilings and good natural light. Now it was the Harrison Technical Institute, named for Emily and David Harrison. Everyone called it HTI. Michael stood at the back of the main workshop, watching 22 young people work at various stations. Some are learning automotive repair, others are studying electrical systems, a few working on advanced projects, building equipment, solving mechanical problems. Every single person in this room had aged out of the foster system in the past 5 years. Every single one had been told they were on their own now, good luck. And every single one had found their way here because Ethan Miller had tracked them down and offered them something nobody else would. A real chance. Hey Uncle Mike. Ethan appeared beside him, wiping grease from his hands with a rag that was somehow dirtier than his hands had been. 16 years old now, finishing his junior year of high school while simultaneously taking college-level engineering courses. He'd turned down early admission to MIT to stay in Pittsburgh, close to the program he was building. We've got 3 new applicants, 1 from Erie, 2 from Philadelphia, all aged out in the past year. Want to sit in on the interviews? You don't need me for that, Michael said. This is your program. It's our program. You provided the funding, the building, the legal structure that makes it legitimate. Ethan gestured around the workshop. I just teach them how to fix things. You do considerably more than that. It was true. Over the past 3 years HTI had become something remarkable. Technical training combined with life skills, job placement assistance, ongoing mentorship. 91% of their graduates were employed within 6 months. 86% were still employed and self-sufficient after 2 years. Numbers that most expensive universities couldn't match. The expansion is moving forward, Ethan said. The Cleveland location opens in 2 months. We've got interest from organizations in 6 other states. At this rate we might have 15 locations by the end of next year. That's going to require significant capital. I know, which is why I need to talk to you about something. Ethan's expression turned serious. Some of the corporate sponsors want us to scale faster. They're talking about standardization, franchising, turning HTI into a brand. They want to hire professional administrators who aren't former foster kids, make it more business efficient. Michael could see where this was going. You said no. I said hell no. Ethan's jaw set in a way that reminded Michael powerfully of Emily. Their whole pitch was about processing more people through the program faster. But that's not what this place is. Every kid who walks through that door has a different story, different trauma, different needs. You can't standardize that. You can't franchise personal mentorship. So what did you tell them? That we'll grow at our own pace, that we'll stay small enough to actually know every person in our program. Those former foster kids will always be the ones running these locations because they understand things others can't. Ethan met Michael's eyes. I'd rather have 5 locations that actually change lives than 50 that just process people and collect metrics for grant applications. Michael felt pride surge through him. Your mother would have fought the same fight. I know, you've told me enough stories. Ethan smiled slightly. There's something else. The Cleveland location needs a director, someone who understands the technical side and the human side. I was thinking of offering it to Maria Gonzalez. She was in our first cohort, remember? She's got her automotive certification now, and has been volunteering here on weekends. The young woman who rebuilt that entire transmission from scrap parts, that's her. She grew up in 8 different foster homes, aged out at 18 with $300 and nowhere to go. She's exactly the kind of person who should be running these programs. Michael nodded. Offer her the position. They stood in comfortable silence watching the workshop activity. Young people are learning, building, creating futures that had seemed impossible just months earlier. Can I ask you something? Ethan said. That vote you almost died for, the Anti-Discrimination and Worker Protection Act. 3 years later, is it working? According to Department of Labor statistics, yes. Average wages for low-income contract workers are up 16%. Formal discrimination complaints are down 28%. It's not perfect, there are enforcement challenges, loopholes that need closing, but it's real progress. But, Michael sighed, but there's always another fight. Another bill that needs passing. Another group that needs protecting. Sometimes I wonder if individual actions really matter when the problems are so systemic. Ethan looked at his uncle thoughtfully. You know what I think about when I doubt whether this matters. I think about that morning on Route 22. If I hadn't been there, you would have missed that vote. That bill wouldn't have passed. Millions of people would still be stuck in exploitative situations. One person in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing, that changed the outcome for millions. That's not small, Uncle Mike. That's everything. Michael felt his throat tighten. I was so focused on making the vote that I never stopped to think about what would have happened if you hadn't been there. You would have found another way. That's who you are. Ethan turned back to face the workshop. But the point is, we need both. We need people writing laws and people fixing cars on the side of the road. We need votes in Congress and kids learning skills in warehouses. It's all connected. You taught me that. Michael thought about Emily, who'd spent her too short life helping individual children one at a time. About Anna, who'd fought bureaucracy for 3 decades to protect kids nobody else cared about. About his father, who'd believed in honest work until the system proved that wasn't enough. Your mother would be proud of you, Michael said quietly. I hope so. Ethan's voice was soft. Come on, let's go meet those new applicants. I want you there when we tell them they're in. You're better at the inspirational speech part. They walked back into the workshop together. Uncle and nephew, legislator and mechanic. 2 people who'd found each other against impossible odds and decided to build something that honored the people they'd lost. Outside, the Pittsburgh sky was gray with a typical autumn overcast. Inside, 22 young people who'd been told they didn't matter were learning that they did. And somewhere across Pennsylvania, workers who'd never heard the name Michael Harrison were earning fair wages and working in safer conditions because one man had refused to accept that sabotage meant defeat. 3 years later, Richard Cole was serving 12 years in federal prison. The American Economic Freedom Coalition had paid a $7 million settlement to avoid prosecution. The corporations had moved on to fighting other regulations, but the law remained, the protections held. And every morning, somewhere in America, a worker showed up to a job that paid fairly, treated them with dignity, and gave them a chance to build something better. That was the real victory.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.